Tonight's journey begins in a time of shadows and hardships, a time ruled not by reason but by superstition, plagues, punishments, and pottage. This is not the glamorous Middle Ages of fairy tales and noble knights. No, this is the raw, unfiltered reality of medieval life, and for the average person, surviving even a single day was a daunting challenge. Imagine waking up in the year 1325. You are alive, but so are the fleas. Your bed consists of a half-rotted straw mattress, infested with insects and filled with hay that reeks of livestock, because it recently served as a barn floor. Pillows, memory foam, or anything remotely comfortable is non-existent. The only cover is a woolen blanket, unchanged since last winter, now so grimy and heavy it rivals the weight of a small animal. Outside, a church bell tolls sharply in the distance. It serves as the medieval version of an alarm clock, louder, harsher, and completely unforgiving. The house is a cramped one-room wooden hut with no windows and no concept of privacy. Family members, animals, and a host of insects all cohabitate within the same tiny space. The air is a nauseating blend of stale beer, body odour, damp livestock, and the sour presence of mould. Scented candles are unheard of, and even if they existed, they would quickly melt into the dirt floor. The person living in this world might only be 22 years old, yet already middle-aged by medieval standards. Their spine creaks and their joints throb with each movement. Rising from bed is a trial in itself. The floor might be soaked from a leaking roof or crusted with filth from wandering animals. Walking barefoot becomes an intimate interaction with the local ecosystem. There's no privacy, no individual space. One's siblings, parents, and perhaps a random extended relative all wait beside them. No curtains, no walls, just communal living at its rawest. In medieval Europe, solitude doesn't exist. There are always people nearby, and pests and rats. The day barely begins before nature demands attention. But relieving oneself in this era is a far cry from modern hygiene. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, and certainly no flushing mechanism. For the average peasant, the lavatory is often just a wooden bucket behind the house. Overflowing and unclean, this bucket might already be full due to a family member's unfortunate dinner choices. Once finished, waste is casually tossed into the streets. A cry of "Gardez-le" is meant to warn passers-by, but few people ever react quickly enough. The streets serve as open sewers, a slurry of human waste, animal droppings, and other dubious liquids. For those fortunate enough to have access to public latrines, the experience involves sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers. Privacy is a myth. The stench is overwhelming. Toilet paper as we know it does not exist. People clean themselves with straw, leaves, moss, or, on lucky days, a rag. Many simply wipe with their hands. This practice makes it abundantly clear why handshakes were not yet popular in medieval society. Even nobles fare only slightly better. Castles often include a guard robe, a hole in the wall that deposits waste directly into the moat. But these waste chutes sometimes serve a second, more sinister function. Determined enemies have been known to infiltrate castles by climbing up them. From the peasantry to the nobility, medieval toileting is a public, humiliating, and often dangerous endeavour. One wrong step on a slick stone, and a person could find themselves face first in humanity's worst. Breakfast, if it can be called that, offers no comfort. There's no steaming coffee, no fruit bowls, no eggs cooked to perfection. Instead, the morning meal is a grim bowl of pottage, a thick, lumpy stew made from whatever scraps are available. It may include grains, root vegetables, and if luck permits, a few beans. The pot is rarely cleaned. New ingredients are simply dumped atop the old, creating a mushy amalgam of weeks-old flavours. Beside the bowl is a piece of bread so dense and tough it might as well serve as armour. Often made from coarse rye or barley, and sometimes bulked up with ground bark or sawdust. This bread is more tool than food. With each bite, teeth are risked. This is the medieval morning, a blend of discomfort, exposure, and endless discomfort. From waking up next to livestock to eating recycled stew and tossing waste into the streets, every moment is a test of endurance. And all of this, it's only the beginning of the day. The morning continues with more discomfort. Instead of enjoying a hearty breakfast with orange juice or a frothy oat milk latte, most medieval people start their day drinking beer. At 6 in the morning, it may sound unusual, but there is a good reason. The water is filled with parasites and grime. Beer, especially a weak ale with low alcohol content, offers a safer alternative. Even children drink it. Nobody particularly enjoys it, but it won't kill them outright. Meat or cheese? Such luxuries are reserved for Sundays, feast days, and only if the local lord feels charitable. Most peasants consume meat just a few times a year. Fresh fruit is a seasonal treat, often turned into wine by the time it's found. Spices? Forget it. A pinch of pepper costs more than an entire month's wages. Salt is so precious that it's kept under lock and key. And so people gnaw on gritty bread, swallow their morning beer, and try not to think about whether a rat nibbled their porridge during the night. Breakfast offers no joy. It doesn't energize. It simply happens. And once it's over, it's time to get to work. Because in the Middle Ages, work isn't optional. It's survival. After consuming the dreary meal, people dress themselves. Not that it offers much comfort. The average peasant owns just one outfit, a rough wool tunic or linen shift worn daily for months, even years. There is no seasonal fashion, only a slow progression toward rags or fungal infection. Underwear is optional. If one is lucky, they might wear a linen undertunic. If not, they go without, enduring scratchy wool against bare skin. These clothes are hand-stitched by people who likely had no idea what a proper seam should look like. Laundry is a nightmare. There are no washing machines, no soap, and certainly no dry cleaners. The clothing stiffens over time, accumulating stains and absorbing the scent of compost and livestock. Washing them requires fetching water from a river or well, heating it over a fire, scrubbing with ashes or lye, and drying in the rare sunlight. Shoes, if they exist, are crude leather constructions with minimal stitching and no support. Most peasants go barefoot, stepping through mud, dung, and disease-ridden puddles. This means their skin suffers constantly. Itching is part of life. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs infest everyone, nobles, monks, children. No one is spared. Scratching an armpit with a wooden spoon while speaking with the local priest is perfectly normal. The skin becomes raw, the scalp becomes a battleground of bites. Rashes are common, and without dermatologists or medications, they simply linger. If infection doesn't set in, the rash becomes an unwelcome companion for half the year. Now dressed in discomfort, it's time to face the day. But smiling? That's rare. Not for emotional reasons, but dental ones. Toothbrushes, toothpaste, floss, and mouthwash are non-existent. Oral hygiene is a foreign concept. Some might chew twigs or rinse with vinegar or wine, but that's the extent of dental care. By their mid-20s, many people's teeth resemble relics from a crypt. Cavities abound, gums are swollen, and decay is rampant. Sugar, while still rare, is becoming more accessible to the rich. It's used sparingly, mostly to showcase wealth. Nobles can afford to ruin their teeth faster. Peasants do it more slowly with gritty porridge and hard bread. Toothaches are constant companions, dull and relentless. Pain pushes many to desperation. Without dentists, people turn to barber surgeons, the same individuals who cut hair, who extract teeth using iron hooks by candlelight. There's no anesthesia, only raw pain. An infected tooth can lead to fever and sepsis, potentially causing death. In the Middle Ages, a simple toothache could become fatal. Socially, things aren't better. Halitosis is universal. Romantic attraction is not based on smiles, but on land and livestock. One's mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing. With aching teeth and stiff clothes, the next step is heading out to face a brutal workday. The real job begins now, the one that will push the body to its limit and define the essence of survival in medieval times. The pain in the back is only beginning. It's time to work. But there is no office, no desk, no coffee break, and certainly no promotion. For about 90% of the population, the job is simple: survive while labouring for someone else's comfort. As a peasant, one toils on land owned by a lord who likely doesn't even remember their name. The workday begins at sunrise and only ends when the sun dips behind the trees. Tools include a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and the few unbroken bones left in the body. There are no weekends, no shifts, and no lunch breaks. There is only labour, from dawn until dusk, 6 days a week. Sunday might be a rest day, unless it's harvest time, raiders have attacked, or one is praying that an infected toe doesn't turn black and fall off. The labour is relentless. Fields must be ploughed by hand or, for the fortunate few, with the help of oxen. Ditches are dug, seeds are sown, weeds are pulled, and water is carried until the spine begins to resemble the letter S. No one asks how a person feels. Mental health isn't a concern. Survival is the only metric. For women, the load is even heavier. In addition to fieldwork, they raise children, clean, cook, spin wool, feed livestock, and try to ignore the creeping lice infestation brought home by their husbands. Children join the labour force early, often by the age of 5. They don't attend school or play with toys. Instead, they wield tiny rakes and hope not to die of the flu. For those not working the land, life isn't much easier. Blacksmiths, tanners, and coopers spend their days surrounded by fire, chemicals, or animal entrails, all in poorly ventilated sheds. The compensation? Survival. The benefits? Occasional bleeding. If a bone breaks or a fever strikes, there's no choice but to drink warm ale and keep moving. One cannot afford a single day off. Those who cannot work do not eat, and those who cannot eat are quickly replaced. So the shovel is gripped tight. Blisters are ignored. Work continues. Because in medieval life, employment isn't a career. It's a slow-motion test of endurance. With the back now ablaze from hours in the field, the weather becomes the next tormentor. In the Middle Ages, the climate doesn't shift between seasons. It punishes. Winter begins the onslaught. Homes are built of thin wood with gaps wide enough to toss a chicken through. Windows are covered with cloth, not glass. Insulation is non-existent. A fire may burn in the hearth, but firewood is precious, sometimes even illegal to gather. Picking up a stick from the wrong forest can result in execution. So people wrap themselves in damp wool tunics, crouch near dying embers, and wake with noses frozen. Feet are always cold. Fingers become stiff, immovable. Frostbite? It has no diagnosis. It's just considered misfortune. When summer arrives, the suffering merely changes form. Homes become ovens. There's no ventilation, no fans, and certainly no deodorant. Clothing is soaked in sweat, yet removing layers is scandalous, inviting judgment, sunburns, and insect bites. Flies swarm the room, drawn by unwashed bodies and remnants of goat stew from last week. Mosquitoes buzz through the air, as neighbours shout and babies cry through the thin walls. Outside, the sun blazes. There's no sunblock, no protective gear, unless a makeshift hat fashioned from straw is considered sufficient. Yet the labour continues. Heat stroke is labelled as merely taking a bad turn. So whether one is shivering in a dark, cold hovel, praying toes survive until spring, or sweltering in summer while thighs chafe raw, the suffering remains constant. Regardless of the season, nothing ever changes. Clothes still itch, food remains terrible, and the next brutal task always waits. This is climate control, medieval edition. There is none. Thirst arrives next, but water is a trap. It's not refreshing, it's deadly. Streams appear clear and inviting, like something from a fantasy. But just upstream, someone has dumped a chamber pot, or worse, a rotting animal has been left to decay. Every sip carries parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial terror of the medieval world. This is why everyone drinks beer. Yes, even children. But not the kind that fuels parties. This is small beer, low in alcohol, high in survival. Brewing it involves boiling the water, making it safer than the runoff in the village ditch. Wine exists too, but only for the wealthy. It's expensive, indulgent, and guarantees no productivity until well past noon. And what about bathing? Surely water is used for cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice. Bathing in the Middle Ages was not just rare, it was considered dangerous. At the time, many believed that washing opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body. The protective layer of grime accumulated on the skin was thought to guard against illness. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they gained reputations as hotspots for gossip, scandal, and occasionally full-blown debauchery. As a result, the church intervened and many were closed. Even for those who wished to bathe, it was a difficult process. Water had to be fetched from a well, boiled over a fire, poured into a leaky wooden tub, and used quickly before someone else claimed it. Rainwater collected in barrels was no better, often filled with bird droppings, insect larvae, and thriving moss. Refreshing? Not quite. In every context, drinking, cleaning, or irrigating crops, water was more of a gamble than a life-giver. One misstep, one gulp too many, and death might follow. Sickness came fast, and recovery was rare. So today, when drinking clean tap water, it's worth remembering those who lived without such a luxury. In those times, even a stubbed toe or a minor illness could become a death sentence. If someone fell ill, a doctor was needed, but unfortunately medicine in the Middle Ages was little more than organised torture wrapped in superstition. Diagnosis often revolved around the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Any ailment, from fever to broken bones, was blamed on an imbalance of these fluids. The treatment? Bloodletting. A dull blade or a hungry leech was used to draw blood, often by a barber who doubled as the village medical expert. Sadness or anxiety was blamed on excess black bile. The remedy? Laxatives, herbal purges, or cold compresses paired with whispered prayers and sideways glances as others quietly planned a funeral. Broken bones or infected wounds meant unimaginable pain. Surgery involved unsterilised knives and red-hot tools, not for cleanliness but for intimidation. Anesthesia did not exist. Antibiotics were centuries away. Germ theory wasn't yet a concept. People believed illness stemmed from bad air or moral failings. A stomachache might be attributed to sinful thoughts. The response? Confession, vomiting, and a visit from a priest bearing last rites. If a patient deteriorated, the regimen continued with more leeches, strange potions, and silent hope. If death came, it was expected. If survival occurred, the doctor claimed victory. The leech received praise, and divine mercy was assumed. Medicine in the Middle Ages didn't heal. It challenged people to survive the cure. After a day filled with toil, pests, and leeches, food offered no relief. Upon returning home, one might hope for a comforting meal. But most meals were more threat than treat. Food preservation was nearly non-existent. Without refrigeration, meat was hung in smoke or brine, often covered in flies and occasionally shared with rodents. Bread, a staple, was far from safe. During poor harvests, it was bulked up with bark, clay, or sawdust. Worse, rye bread could contain ergot, a toxic fungus causing hallucinations, convulsions, and even death, an involuntary mix of LSD and poison. Vegetables were available only when in season. Turnips, however, were always around, boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage. The mystery stew brewed continuously for days or weeks. Fruits arrived briefly in autumn and spoiled quickly. Sugar was a rare luxury hoarded by nobles. Dairy was equally unreliable. Milk spoiled within hours. Butter and cheese were marginally safer, but swarmed with bacteria. People consumed them anyway. Hunger made strong arguments. Spices like pepper or cinnamon were more valuable than gold. For peasants, flavour came from onions, salt, if lucky, and bitterness. Most meals tasted like boiled burlap with a dash of misery. Food was more than sustenance. It was political. Game animals belonged to the Lord. Poaching a rabbit could lead to a fine, imprisonment, or execution. Dinner could literally become a death sentence. Eating was always a risk. Yet people ate. They had to. As the day ends and another bowl of questionable stew is reluctantly consumed by firelight, there is no promise of rest. The Middle Ages never offered comfort, only survival. Relaxation is a dangerous indulgence in the medieval world. God is watching. So is the priest. And so is the neighbour named Agnes, who will report any failure to attend Mass without hesitation. Religion in medieval Europe isn't a part of life. It defines life. The Church dictates everything: the calendar, the law, education, if literacy is even accessible, birth, marriage, death, and all that lies between. Think of the Church as a spiritual landlord, and no one is ever caught up on rent. Each day is shaped by the tolling of prayer bells. Morning, noon, and night, the town's bell rings not as a gentle reminder, but as a mandate. Miss a prayer? It's a sin, forget to bow. Sin, eat meat on a Friday, another sin. Even dream about the neighbour's wife, a double sin. Hell is a constant threat, described in excruciating detail. Rivers of fire, boiling lakes of blood, pitchfork-wielding demons, and endless wailing. If plague doesn't frighten the people, eternal damnation certainly will. The Bible is unreadable to most, written in Latin, accessible only to monks, clergy, and the occasional noble child who is too delicate for manual labour. The priest is the interpreter of all truth. If he claims that crop failure is the result of insufficient prayer, the only recourse is to pray harder. Tithes are non-negotiable. 1/10 of all possessions must go to the church. If wheat is grown, 1/10 must be given. If chickens are raised, eggs are handed over. If nothing is owned, one is both spiritually and economically bankrupt. Holidays are holy days. There are many, and while they offer relief from labour, they are not for celebration. Mass attendance is expected, fasting is routine, confession is mandatory, joy is treated with suspicion. To question the church is dangerous. Heretics are burned, witches are drowned, blasphemers are flogged, skeptics are corrected swiftly and harshly. So people conform. They chant, they bow. They pray that, after enduring life's many degradations, their soul may find peace in paradise, assuming the priest approves. God may be merciful, but the institution that speaks for him rarely is. As difficult as medieval life is, it is even more brutal for women. All the hardship of peasantry is compounded by childbirth, obedience, and a lack of societal presence. A woman's life is hard mode, with no support, no restart, and no recognition. From birth, a girl's future is predetermined. Marriage happens young. Bearing children follows soon after. Service to a husband is expected. Education, rare, unless noble birth grants entry to a convent. Intellectual development often ends with the ability to churn butter and mend tunics. Betrothals occur early, sometimes at 12. Pregnancy at 14 is not uncommon. These unions are about property and alliances, not love. The bride's opinion is irrelevant. Upon marriage, she becomes her husband's property. Her duties: bear heirs, manage the household, prepare meals, and remain silent. Complaints earn her the label of nag, or worse, witch. That title often leads to drowning or burning, depending on regional preference. Childbirth is a deadly gamble. There is no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anaesthesia. Midwives offer assistance, but complications frequently prove fatal for mother, child, or both. Some women survive 10 births. Many do not survive 2. And survival is only the beginning. A newborn means additional duties. There's no rest. The mother is expected to feed the baby, clean the home, assist in the fields, and care for others. Unmarried women are viewed with suspicion. Widows are vulnerable. Outspoken women are dangerous. Those who defy expectations are often accused of witchcraft, especially if they possess herbal knowledge, assertiveness, or simply appear odd. Even within religious life, women are restricted. Nuns live under severe regulations, lacking speech, freedom, and equality. Spiritually, they rank below men. In the Middle Ages, women are expected to obey, reproduce, and endure. Ideally, they suffer with a smile. At this point in the day, a person has battled dirt, hunger, injustice, and possibly a rogue goat. And yet, violence is still waiting, loud, bloody, and completely normalised by medieval standards. Peace is not the default state. Law and order exist, but they rely heavily on the temperament of local lords. Violence occurs in homes, streets, battlefields, churches, and even bread lines. Crime is rampant. Punishment is severe. Justice is less protection and more public spectacle. Stealing bread could cost a hand. Telling lies might lead to tongue piercing. Gossip too freely, and one might be forced into the scold's bridle, a metal mask with a mouthpiece meant to silence and shame. Serious accusations, heresy, theft, witchcraft, require serious proof. That proof comes in the form of torture. Trials by ordeal determine guilt. In one version, the accused places a hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If the wound heals without infection in 3 days, they are innocent. If not, they are guilty. Another test involves water. Sink and you're innocent, but likely drowned. Float and you're guilty and punished. Executions are public affairs. Crowds gather. Heads roll. The event is both punishment and entertainment. Life in the Middle Ages isn't just hard. It's cruel, theatrical, and endlessly unforgiving. Hangings, beheadings, and burnings were not just punishments. They were entertainment. People brought snacks and gathered as though attending a festival. It was the medieval version of cable television. Domestic violence was not frowned upon, it was normalised. Husbands were legally and socially permitted, even expected, to discipline their wives and children. Street fights broke out regularly, and looking the wrong way at a noble's horse could earn a beating. As for war, it was always just on the edge of happening. Whether driven by territorial feuds, religious crusades, or sheer boredom, someone was always preparing to march and spill blood in the name of honour or divine will. Violence wasn't a failure of the system, it was the system. Everyone lived with the knowledge that life was fragile, justice was arbitrary, and a disagreement with a neighbour over livestock might end fatally. Survival meant moving cautiously, keeping one's gaze lowered, and avoiding anyone carrying a weapon. After enduring lice, leeches, relentless work, and the constant threat of brutal punishment, one more certainty remained: an early and often unceremonious death. Anyone who lived beyond 40 was a rarity, sometimes even celebrated as the old one, not as a title of respect, but as a statistical anomaly. Life expectancy averaged around 30 to 40 years, heavily skewed by the high rate of infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before reaching the age of 5. Disease, hunger, or a single harsh winter was often enough to end a young life. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics, and no real hope. Those who survived childhood entered adulthood already worn down. Labour began as soon as one could stand, and by the age of 25, most bodies ached like ancient machinery. It was common to be missing teeth, a finger, or even a significant portion of hope. For women, childbirth was the greatest threat. Without pain relief or medical aid, giving birth often meant death. The process involved only hot water, whispered prayers, and perhaps a hand to hold while bleeding out on a straw mat. Many women died in childbirth. Those who survived still faced a life of physical strain and emotional toll. Men too faced constant danger, from farming mishaps to infected wounds, from drunken brawls to ill-fated crusades. Even a routine walk to the market carried the risk of encountering bandits or corrupt officials. Death came in all forms. Plague turned cities into graveyards overnight, famine could devastate entire regions, and spoiled food might induce agonizing hallucinations before ending life entirely. Burials, when they happened, were quick. Embalming was unknown, coffins were rare. Often there was only a hastily dug hole, a few rushed prayers, and a shallow pile of earth, assuming space could be found in the churchyard. In essence, life in medieval times was short, brutal, and constantly overshadowed by death. Retirement wasn't a phase of life, it meant disappearing quietly. And so the day draws to a close. A person in medieval Europe wakes in filth, relieves themselves in a bucket, brushes teeth with imagination, fights through hunger, works until collapsing, scratches endlessly, prays desperately, and avoids execution for owning something as trivial as a squirrel. Those fantasies of being a knight? They were just that, fantasies. The romantic image of medieval life with noble warriors, elegant ladies, candle-lit feasts, and glorious battles was largely a myth. Reality was different, harsh, hierarchical, and indifferent. If one was born poor, they remained poor. The rich had better odds but still lived one bad meal away from disaster. Even nobles weren't immune. Their castles were cold, damp stone traps filled with fleas, smoke, and political marriages. A goblet of wine and a fur cloak offered little protection from infected wounds or battlefield skirmishes. Simpler times? Not at all. Everything was slower, harder, and more painful. Every action had consequences. From childbirth to chewing, daily life was a gauntlet. Comfort was rare. Leisure was fantasy. Dreams, if they existed, were quickly stifled by the limits of the era. There was no moving up, no medical cures, no search engine to investigate symptoms. Most people lived, worked, and died within a few miles of their birthplace. And yet, in spite of everything, they laughed. They sang, they told stories, found love, and made meaning from their moments. Not because life was gentle, but because human beings are persistently hopeful. So tonight, as one slips into a clean bed, surrounded by modern comforts, plumbing, and medicine, it's worth remembering those who came before. Those who endured. Not out of luxury, but out of sheer determination. Those who live with central heating today might pause to quietly thank the modern world, and the ancestors who endured rats, famine and feudalism so they wouldn't have to. Long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, architect of reform and emblem of ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she came from a relatively obscure German princely family. Her small duchy in Pomerania held little power, but Sophie herself possessed traits that no birthright could grant: razor-sharp intellect, irresistible charm, and an unwavering hunger for greatness. Her childhood was strict. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating, a woman more focused on social climbing than nurturing. Her father, a Prussian officer, remained distant, rarely involved. From an early age, Sophie learned to navigate the world through observation, charm, and cleverness. She read voraciously, mastered several languages, and developed the skill to read a room before speaking, skills that would later help her survive and rise in one of Europe's most treacherous courts. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia began searching for a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russian borders. Peter himself was of German heritage, and Elizabeth believed a foreign bride would be more pliable and grateful. Sophie seemed ideal. Of noble blood, raised in the Lutheran faith, which she would be required to renounce, and known for her grace and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, clothed in thin German garments and wearing a diplomatic smile. Pushed forward by her mother like a pawn in a political game, Sophie had different plans. To gain acceptance in Russia, she converted to Orthodoxy and adopted a new name, Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The conversion was more than ceremonial. It was transformative. She wasn't merely changing religions, she was severing ties with her past, stepping into a new identity with no path back. No one witnessing that modest teenage girl in her fur-trimmed coat could have imagined the future awaiting her: betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. From the moment she entered the Russian court, Sophie ceased being a pawn and began strategizing how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was intended to secure her position in the Russian aristocracy, but it felt less like a union and more like imprisonment. Peter, the man destined for the throne, was awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers. He preferred playing war games in private chambers to statecraft, or showing affection to his new wife. Some accounts even claim he refused to consummate the marriage for years. Peter idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia, and resented the Russian court that embraced him. Catherine, in contrast, embraced Russia with fierce determination. She learned the language, absorbed its history, and mastered Orthodox rituals. She yearned to belong. He yearned to flee. Their divide was not just personal, it was profoundly political. The Russian court was a maze of whispers, power plays, and hidden daggers. Empress Elizabeth still ruled with absolute power, but her declining health made the court anxious. Everyone knew change was on the horizon, and everyone plotted accordingly. Catherine's letters were intercepted, her friendships monitored, her every move scrutinized. She couldn't rely on her husband, her mother, still advocating for foreign interests, or even her staff. In this precarious world, allegiances changed with the wind. Catherine adapted. She charmed military officers, befriended scholars, and earned a reputation for poise and discipline, an elegant contrast to Peter's erratic behaviour and disregard for Russian customs. Behind closed doors, she consumed the works of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While the court dismissed her as a passive consort, she quietly constructed a vision for Russia, one built on education, reason, and national strength. But so long as Peter lived, she remained powerless. She would never inherit the throne. She would have to claim it. In 1762, after nearly 20 years of watching and waiting, Catherine made her move. Empress Elizabeth had died. Peter was now Tsar Peter III. His reign, however, quickly unravelled. In mere months, Peter alienated the church, enraged the nobility, and insulted the military. He lavished praise on Prussia, Russia's historical foe, reversed cherished policies, demeaned the clergy, and openly spoke of divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court grew cold, the army murmured. Even the public, devout and proud, saw Peter as a foreign puppet mocking their heritage. Catherine, ever the observer, saw her opportunity. In July of that same year, while Peter vacationed at his summer palace, Catherine executed a bloodless coup. Supported by key military figures, including her lover, Grigory Orlov, and his powerful brothers, she took power with decisive grace. Catherine rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, officially proclaimed Empress Catherine II. With the powerful imperial guard pledging loyalty to her, Peter, caught by surprise and without allies, surrendered within days. He was taken into custody and shortly afterward found dead under suspicious circumstances. The official cause of death was listed as a hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, many believed it was murder. Catherine became empress not through birthright or marriage, but through sheer determination, intelligence, and courage. Her rise to power was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim to the throne had taken control of the Russian Empire without shedding a single drop of blood. But her most difficult challenge still lay ahead, turning that audacious power grab into a lasting reign. She needed to transition from being seen as a cunning conspirator to a visionary leader. Russia needed to accept her. The nobility needed to respect her. And the sprawling empire needed to be held together by more than just fear. Catherine understood that power gained through manoeuvring could easily be lost. To secure her reign, she would need to rule as a reformer and a thinker, not just a strategist. Thus began her evolution from cautious court player to reform-minded monarch. She envisioned a Russia transformed, not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. Where her late husband Peter had obsessed over Prussian rulers and childish games, Catherine admired Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot. She believed in progress, education, reason, and the ideal of a monarch who served the people, even while ruling with absolute authority. Catherine didn't simply study Enlightenment ideals, she embodied them. She exchanged letters with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while defending her brand of enlightened autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and purchased his entire library to support him financially. Behind the scenes, she studied legal codes, debated reforms, and drafted modern policies. One of her most ambitious early initiatives was the creation of the Legislative Commission in 1767, which aimed to overhaul Russia's outdated legal code. Her guiding document, the Nakaz, or Instruction, served as a political manifesto. It called for equality before the law, criticized torture, and emphasized the moral responsibility of rulers. Radical ideas for 18th century Russia, but Catherine made them sound noble, even patriotic. Still, the Enlightenment had to contend with Russian reality, a vast feudal land dominated by powerful nobles who had no interest in change. Catherine understood the need for diplomacy. While she abolished certain forms of torture and expanded access to secular education, she also reinforced the nobility's control over serfs to maintain their support. This was Catherine's tightrope act, philosopher queen in public, pragmatic empress in private. She navigated between the gilded salons of Enlightenment Europe and the harsh realities of Russian politics. Her vision wasn't to turn Russia into France or Prussia, it was to modernize it in a uniquely Russian way. Her reforms came draped in velvet, but carried a steel edge. Yet her ambitions extended far beyond domestic reform. Catherine sought to expand Russia's borders and influence across Europe and Asia. If Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine aimed to tear down the walls. Under her leadership, Russia's territory stretched wider than ever before. She waged wars not merely for defense, but to shape the European map. Her campaigns against the Ottoman Empire during the 1760s and 1770s were driven by more than land. She cast herself as the protector of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule, and as a rightful authority in Eastern Europe. Under the leadership of generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia gained control of key regions, including Crimea and the northern coast of the Black Sea, along with vital access to warm water ports. These victories were both strategic and symbolic. With each expansion, Catherine declared to the world that Russia was no longer a backward fringe of Europe. It was a continental superpower. Catherine also looked westward. Through calculated diplomacy and military strength, she participated in the partitions of Poland, a once powerful commonwealth that had grown politically weak. Alongside Austria and Prussia, she carved up Polish territory in 3 successive partitions. By 1795, Poland had vanished from the map, and Russia had acquired vast lands and millions of new subjects. But conquest under Catherine was not limited to soldiers and swords. She also expanded Russia through infrastructure and ideas. New cities were constructed. Trade routes were broadened. German settlers were invited to cultivate Russian farmland, and the empire transformed into a vast mosaic stretching from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched shores of the Black Sea. Through it all, Catherine remained the driving force, reading reports, issuing decrees, and personally overseeing the shaping of her growing empire. Critics would label her power-hungry and imperialistic, but for Catherine, expansion wasn't driven by ego, it was destiny. She believed that a ruler's greatness was measured not only by ideas, but also by borders. She didn't want to merely govern Russia. She wanted to remake it into a civilized empire, respected, feared, and loyal to her alone. Despite her brilliance and authority, Catherine the Great became equally renowned for her private life. Not all of her influence stemmed from policy or diplomacy. Her personal affairs, particularly her romantic relationships, became one of the most discussed facets of her reign. She had many lovers, not just a few, but a carefully selected series of them. These men were often much younger, striking in appearance, and politically useful. Catherine made no effort to hide these relationships. In fact, she frequently rewarded them with titles, land, and pensions. Those who pleased her were honoured. Those who disappointed her were dismissed, sometimes politely, sometimes with a promotion as a parting gift. Among these companions, one stood out above the rest: Grigory Potemkin. Brilliant, charismatic, and daring, Potemkin's relationship with Catherine blurred the lines between romance, politics, and partnership. Some historians speculate that they may have secretly married. Together, they helped shape Russia's southern strategy, designing colonization projects, military campaigns, and the transformation of Crimea and the Black Sea region. Potemkin was more than a lover. He was her co-ruler in all but name. Yet Europe fixated on scandal. Gossip circulated rapidly. Satirical pamphlets portrayed Catherine as insatiable, unhinged, and immoral. After her death, the rumours only worsened. The most infamous, and completely fabricated, was a grotesque myth involving a horse, invented by her enemies to tarnish her legacy. But why the fixation? The answer was simple: Catherine was a woman who wielded power without apology. In an era where female rulers were expected to be virginal saints or tragic victims, she refused to play any role but her own. She loved, ruled, and lived on her terms, and that made her dangerous. Ironically, while critics branded her immoral, Catherine was deeply philosophical about love and sexuality. She viewed pleasure as a natural part of life, and believed personal relationships didn't have to interfere with public responsibilities. Unlike many male rulers, she was able to separate emotion from governance. In many cases, her relationships were strategic. She surrounded herself with men who were capable, loyal, and politically advantageous. And when their time passed, she released them with grace. Her romantic life, far from weakening her rule, became part of her strategy, a calculated fusion of affection and authority that made her reign both memorable and formidable. Still, her reign was not without peril. In 1773, that peril emerged in the form of a rebellious Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev. He was no ordinary dissenter. Pugachev claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's dead husband. According to his tale, he had survived the coup and returned to reclaim the throne from the foreign usurper. The claim was false. Peter was long dead. But for the oppressed masses, truth was secondary to hope. Pugachev promised liberation, the end of serfdom, lower taxes, and land for the common people. His words ignited unrest across the Volga region, especially among Cossacks, peasants, and religious dissenters. At a time when the divide between nobility and serfs had become unbearable, Pugachev's promises felt like salvation. The Pugachev rebellion became the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns were captured, fortresses fell, and nobles were slaughtered. For a moment it appeared the empire might fracture. Catherine was shaken. This was not a foreign war she could win through diplomacy. It was an internal uprising, a revolt against the very system she led. But Catherine didn't falter. She acted decisively. Professional troops were dispatched. In 1774, Pugachev's forces were crushed. he was captured, paraded in an iron cage, and beheaded in Moscow, his execution a warning to all potential rebels. Afterward, Catherine tightened her grip. Her hopes of liberating the serfs were quietly shelved. The rebellion had revealed the limits of enlightenment in a feudal state. She turned to the nobility for stability, reaffirming their dominance over the peasantry in exchange for loyalty. This was a pivotal moment. The empress who once championed Voltaire now prioritized order over philosophy. Reforms slowed, surveillance increased, and rebellion, even whispered, was extinguished swiftly. Though Pugachev was gone, the memory of his uprising haunted Catherine. It reminded her that power built on inequality could only endure for so long. By the time Catherine approached the end of her life, she had ruled Russia for over 30 years, longer than any female monarch in its history. From the moment she seized power, she defied expectation, reimagined an empire, and redefined what it meant to be both a woman and a sovereign. Under her leadership, Russia grew by more than 200,000 square miles, becoming a true European powerhouse. Catherine's empire expanded with the annexation of Crimea, parts of Poland, and the Black Sea coastline. These were not just military victories, they were strategic accomplishments that secured warm water ports and redefined trade routes. But her legacy was not drawn solely in territory. Catherine left an enduring cultural imprint. She helped establish the Hermitage Museum, amassing one of Europe's most impressive art collections, and corresponded with many of the leading minds of the Enlightenment. Her court became a vibrant centre of sophistication, culture, and intellectual pursuit. In a country long viewed by Western Europe as backward, Catherine elevated Russia's cultural standing. She reformed education, founded schools for girls, and encouraged the printing of books. Catherine introduced smallpox inoculation to Russia, publicly receiving the vaccine herself, an act of remarkable scientific courage in her era. Yet her reign was also defined by contradiction. Though she admired Enlightenment ideals, she never abolished serfdom. In fact, she extended it into newly acquired territories. Her reforms, though ambitious, were largely top-down, designed to modernize the surface of the empire without radically restructuring its foundations. Still, Catherine brought stability and ambition to a nation in need of both. She knew that power was not inherited, it was forged, cultivated, and continually defended. She did not rule by divine right, but by political skill, intellectual might, and unrelenting strategy. She was called many things: a manipulator, a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress. But above all, she was effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was larger, wealthier, and more powerful than it had been in centuries. She left behind a throne firmly secured, an empire transformed, and a myth that would persist through history. Catherine did more than reign. She ruled with vision and intelligence, reshaping the very idea of female power in her time. Despite all her authority and enduring influence, Catherine remained, at her core, a woman navigating a male-dominated world and daring to bend it to her will. Behind the imperial portraits and state documents was someone keenly aware of how fragile her position truly was. She was not born Russian. She claimed the throne through a coup. She led an empire that had no desire for a woman sovereign. Yet, not only did she endure, she thrived. Catherine refused to be ornamental. She was an insatiable reader, prolific writer, and relentless learner. Her daily schedule was grueling, filled with report reading, diplomatic correspondence, policy editing, and court management. She did not merely sit on the throne, she worked it like a seasoned stateswoman. Despite being surrounded by courtiers, artists, and lovers, she confessed in her memoirs how few people she could truly trust. Her relationship with her son Paul was strained. Distrustful of his temperament and political views, she distanced him from state matters, fearing he would undo her reforms. Her deepest emotional bond, her relationship with Grigory Potemkin, evolved into enduring friendship. His death in 1791 left a wound that never fully healed. Catherine curated her public image with precision. She understood the potency of narrative better than most rulers. She cast herself as the mother of Russia, the enlightened monarch, the warrior empress, and the patron of the arts. But beneath these personas was a woman who had faced rejection, scandal, rebellion, and had persevered. When she died in 1796, she left an empire remade and a trail of questions. Could she have done more to free the serfs? Were her Enlightenment ideals compromised by political necessity? Was she more a reformer or a ruler? History would remember her by a title she never claimed for herself: the Great. Not because she was flawless or benevolent or just, but because she seized power and held it on her own terms in a world that tried to deny women power at every turn. She didn't just wear a crown, she redefined what it meant to deserve one. Far from the icy palaces of St. Petersburg, deep in the steamy jungles of Chiapas, Mexico, another tale of a powerful woman began to surface. Among the ruins of Palenque, one of the most enigmatic cities of the ancient Maya, stories whispered through stone carvings and sun-warmed limestone. In 1994, archaeologist Fanny Lopez Jimenez led a team surveying Temple 13, a modest pyramid near the famous Temple of the Inscriptions, the burial site of the mighty King Pakal. Temple 13 was not expected to yield much, but when Lopez's team discovered a sealed chamber beneath the structure, everything changed. Untouched by looters and forgotten by time, the crypt held a pristine sarcophagus. As the archaeologists pried open its lid, red dust erupted, bright toxic cinnabar, a ceremonial powder of mercury sulfide used by the Maya. Within that crimson cloud lay the fragile skeleton of a woman. Her bones were intact. A jade mask still adorned her face. Her body rested among diadems, ear spools, and necklaces crafted from jade and shell. Everything pointed to royalty. And yet her name was missing. No glyphs, no inscriptions. This was one of the richest female burials in Mesoamerica, and yet the woman was a mystery. Why was she buried in red powder? Who was she? A queen, a priestess, or perhaps King Pakal's wife? In the absence of a name, researchers called her the Red Queen. A silent figure whose life, like Catherine's, defied expectations and left behind a legacy wrapped in power, reverence, and myth. The name Red Queen lingered. Yet, even with the aid of modern forensic techniques, researchers could not definitively identify who she was. What they did determine was that she lived around the 7th century, during the golden age of Palenque. Her tomb, unlike most Maya burials, was hidden, intentionally untouched, purposefully isolated. This burial was not merely ceremonial, it was deeply spiritual. The woman interred within was not meant to be remembered by words carved in stone. Instead, she was meant to be honoured through ritual, colour, and the enigma she left behind. The most haunting element of the Red Queen's tomb was not the jade jewellery or the eerie silence of the sealed chamber, it was the red dust. A thick coating of powdered cinnabar covered everything: the sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, and the ceremonial objects. It clung to every surface like blood etched into stone. For the Maya, this was no accident. Cinnabar, composed of crushed mercury sulfide, was one of the most sacred and dangerous substances known to their world. Its vibrant red hue was more than aesthetic. It carried symbolic and spiritual meaning. Red symbolized blood, rebirth, and the vital life force that bridged the mortal and divine. It represented sunrise, sacrifice, and life emerging from death. To the Maya, red was a sacred color of profound transition. Covering the deceased in cinnabar was an act of transformation, preserving the body not for eternity, but for cosmic passage. According to Maya beliefs, death was not an ending, but a portal, a journey into another realm. The Red Queen, whoever she may have been, was prepared for more than death. She was being elevated, perhaps deified. Yet another layer deepens the mystery. Cinnabar is toxic. Prolonged exposure can lead to mercury poisoning, tremors, hallucinations, and even death. While the Maya did not grasp the chemistry, they understood its intensity. It was volatile, powerful, dangerous. Bathing a body in it sent a clear message. This person was no ordinary mortal. In Palenque, only a few individuals were interred with cinnabar. Among them was Pakal the Great, the legendary king whose pyramid dominates the city. His remains, like hers, were saturated in the crimson powder. That detail alone stirred speculation. Could the Red Queen have been his wife, his mother, someone of divine equal status? Her skull was laid upon a bed of jaguar skin, another sacred symbol. Surrounding her were bone needles, obsidian blades, and miniature jade figurines. Items that spoke of rituals performed either during her life or in her honour after death. Her burial told a story without words, a narrative of authority cloaked in secrecy. She was prepared to traverse the underworld not in silence, but through ceremony, drenched in the colour of sacrifice. Around the Red Queen's remains was a quiet world punctuated by the gleam of jade, shell, and obsidian. These were not merely adornments, they were sacred offerings, each selected to accompany her spirit through the Maya afterlife, the Xibalba. Flanking her were jade necklaces, cool to the touch, their polished surfaces still shining after 13 centuries underground. To the Maya, jade was sacred. It symbolized eternal life, the green vitality of maize, the essence of the jungle, and the breath of gods. Only the elite were buried with jade. The Red Queen wore it across her chest, on her wrists, in her ears, clear signs of status and spiritual significance. Among the most profound items was her funerary mask, fashioned from tiny mosaic tiles of jade. Unlike the golden masks of Egypt, this one was subtle, arranged to match the contours of her skull. The mask had purpose. It was meant to protect her spirit, preserve her identity, and present her as divine in the eyes of the gods. Scattered near her bones were bone needles, obsidian knives, and shells, possibly tools of ritual or symbols of her role as a healer, priestess, or royal matriarch. One bone pin bore an engraving, faint but deliberate, an echo of her voice lost to time. At her feet and along the perimeter of the chamber were ceramic vessels, still sealed, likely once filled with food, drink, or incense to sustain her journey. To the Maya, the afterlife was treacherous, filled with trials and darkness. These items were not luxuries, they were necessities. The tomb, though rich in meaning, was not gaudy. There was no gold, no chariots, no display of excess. It was intimate, intentional, a map for the soul. Through her burial, one could glimpse the Maya view of death, not as an end, but as a transformation of power. For all the ritual and reverence surrounding her, the Red Queen left behind one haunting mystery. No name. No glyphs adorned her sarcophagus. No carvings on the walls revealed her identity. She was clearly someone of immense importance. But who? Since her tomb was first opened, scholars have worked to connect the dots. The most compelling theory identifies her as Tsakbu Ajau, the wife of Kinich Janab Pakal, Pakal the Great, Palenque's most celebrated ruler. Tsakbu was more than a consort. She was nobly born, married into the royal dynasty at a young age, and bore at least 3 sons, all of whom attained high ranks. She played a significant ceremonial role during Pakal's reign. What supports this theory is the tomb's proximity to Pakal's own grand burial in the Temple of the Inscriptions. Her chamber was discovered just a few feet away. The closeness suggests a connection of both spiritual and dynastic weight. The Red Queen may not be remembered by name, but she was never meant to be forgotten. The deliberate pairing of husband and wife rulers, even in death, spoke volumes about the ceremonial nature of power in the Maya world. Only 2 tombs in Palenque were discovered with such intense cinnabar coverage, those of Pakal the Great and the Red Queen. This was unlikely to be a coincidence, but the mystery only deepened. DNA tests were conducted on both sets of remains in hopes of confirming a relationship. The results, however, were inconclusive. The woman's bones showed no direct maternal link to Pakal, but that did not eliminate the possibility of a marital relationship. After all, marriage did not require shared blood. Some scholars have proposed that the Red Queen could have been Sak Kuk, Pakal's powerful mother who ruled Palenque as queen regent before he came of age. Others have speculated she might have been a high priestess, a sister, or an ancestor whose name had been lost to the erosion of history. Yet the strongest evidence continues to point to Tsakbu Ajau, a queen by title, mother of kings, and spiritual equal to Pakal. The absence of a name may not have been an omission, but an intention. In Maya cosmology, the soul endured not through monuments, but through ritual, symbol, and the whisper of the sacred earth. Thus, the Red Queen remains suspended between legend and truth, a ruler remembered not in stone, but in scarlet and silence. To understand the Red Queen, one must first understand the world from which she came. a world where Maya women, particularly those of noble blood, held far more influence than commonly acknowledged. In Maya civilization, politics was often a family enterprise. Royal women were not passive consorts. They were diplomats, priestesses, and power brokers. They conducted rituals, sponsored temples, and played vital roles in preserving dynastic legitimacy. Their bloodlines were political currency, used to forge alliances and reinforce claims to the throne. Consider Sakkup, for example, the mother of Pakal the Great. When Palenque's throne was left vacant, she stepped in as queen regent and ruled until her son came of age. She was not a figurehead. She ruled actively, issuing decrees and overseeing monumental construction. Without her leadership, Pakal might never have risen to power. She was not an anomaly either. Across the Maya world, in cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions depict women leading ceremonies, waging political campaigns, and even ruling independently. They were frequently represented in stelae and murals, adorned in elaborate headdresses and ceremonial garments, often standing beside kings as equals, or even above them. Their names were once etched into glyphs and remembered across generations, until the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors, who brought with them a colonial worldview that largely erased the memory of powerful native women. Yet, archaeology paints a different picture, one of complex gender roles and negotiated power. In this context, the Red Queen's burial takes on profound meaning. Even if she did not rule in name, her sacred cinnabar-rich tomb beside Pakal's suggests she was a foundational figure in the royal order. Her jade funerary mask was not merely decorative, it was a symbol of identity and divine status, representing power preserved through death. Her bloodline may have been the very thread that held Palenque's dynastic fabric together. In Maya civilization, a queen was not simply a consort, she was a guardian of sacred lineage, a voice in ceremony, and often the vital bridge between gods and humans. The Red Queen may remain nameless to modern historians, but she was never voiceless in her time. She was not just buried with treasures, she was buried within an architectural message. Her tomb was steeped in Maya cosmology, ritual symbolism, and deliberate design. It was not just a grave, it was a spiritual gateway. Her body was discovered inside Temple 13, a relatively small pyramid at the heart of Palenque's ceremonial centre. Yet its close proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions, the grand tomb of Pakal the Great, was no accident. These temples were constructed with sacred intention, their positioning guided by myth, astrology, and dynastic symbolism. Though Temple 13 appears modest compared to its grand neighbour, it houses something uniquely intimate, a sealed crypt, untouched by looters, preserved in near-perfect condition. Constructed deep within the temple's core, the tomb could only be accessed by a steep, narrow staircase, a descent that echoed a ritual journey into the underworld. The chamber was stark, its walls made of cut stone, sealed tight for more than 1,130 years. There were no murals or glyphs, no ornate carvings. But perhaps that silence was meaningful. This was not a space for the living to interpret, but for the dead to transcend. At the chamber's centre sat her sarcophagus, carved from limestone, resembling an altar. It echoed Pakal's more famous coffin next door. While Pakal's sarcophagus lid is engraved with images of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's tomb was subdued. The focus lay inward, on her body the cinnabar and the sacred rites of passing. Subtle architectural cues hinted at deeper symbolism. The tomb was aligned east to west, mirroring the sun's journey across the sky, from birth to death. Though compact, the chamber carried spiritual weight. It felt deliberate, personal, a sacred space for a revered individual. Maya temples were not simply places of worship. They were cosmological bridges, linking the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. In that framework, the Red Queen's tomb was more than a final resting place. It was a vessel for transformation, a threshold between realms. And in that timeless space of stone and scarlet, her story endures, etched not in names but in symbols, silence, and reverence. To be buried in a Maya temple was to be elevated beyond the human realm. The Red Queen's eternal resting place was not an afterthought. It was a carefully crafted shrine, a sacred space where death transformed into transcendence. Her bones lay encased in stone, her essence preserved in cinnabar, and her legacy etched into the architecture itself. The temple, though silent, speaks volumes. It tells all who enter that she mattered. To the ancient Maya, death was not an end. It was a passage, a sacred transition into the underworld known as Xibalba. For someone of the Red Queen's status, that crossing was not only spiritual, it was political, cosmological, and deeply ritualized. Maya texts and iconography describe Xibalba not as a peaceful afterlife, but a treacherous realm of shadows, rivers of blood, and trials overseen by gods of death. Only those ritually prepared, spiritually equipped, and properly buried could survive the journey. The Red Queen was buried in full ceremonial honour. Her body was wrapped in cinnabar, a substance sacred and dangerous, symbolising blood, rebirth, and divine power. She was enclosed in stone, surrounded by offerings. These were unmistakable signs of an elite burial. But there was more. The presence of bone needles and obsidian blades in her tomb suggests rituals of auto-sacrifice, perhaps symbolic tools referencing rites she performed in life, or that were reenacted at her burial to empower her spirit. Her jade funerary mask, carefully assembled from small green tiles, was not mere decoration. It served as a spiritual vessel, preserving her identity for recognition by the gods. The Maya believed that the face was a mirror of the soul. To pass into the afterlife, one needed to be known by the divine. Ceramic vessels surrounding her body may once have held maize, chocolate, water, or pulqui, nourishment for her journey. Other items like stingray spines or shell trumpets may have represented ritual instruments, divine calls, or tokens of communication with the other world. Burial for the Maya was not simply a farewell. It was a transformation. They believed in cycles, death as planting, burial as seeding, and the afterlife as rebirth. Kings and queens were considered earthly manifestations of divine power. In death, they returned to their sacred origins. The Red Queen, painted in the colour of blood, entombed in a pyramid, and honoured with ceremonial artefacts, was not being laid to rest. She was being prepared for rebirth. Not as a mortal, but as a being eternally tied to the cosmic order. Her burial marked not the end of her story, but the beginning of her legend. Just steps away from the Red Queen's tomb lies one of the most celebrated burial sites in Mesoamerica, that of Kinich Janab Pakal, known simply as Pakal the Great. His elaborate tomb, hidden within the Temple of the Inscriptions, is famous for its artistry, scale, and profound cosmic symbolism. But the Red Queen's burial stands out not merely for what was found within it, but for where it was found. Her sarcophagus was located in Temple 13, positioned directly beside Pakal's resting place. In Palenque, a city where architecture aligned with celestial order, such positioning was intentional. It was not a coincidence. It was a declaration, set in stone. Many scholars believe the Red Queen was Tsakbu Ajao, Pakal's queen and closest consort. Though her tomb lacks inscriptions, the burial parallels between them are striking. Both covered in cinnabar, both buried in pyramids, both surrounded by jade offerings, both honoured with reverence. The similarities are not random. They suggest a shared narrative. While Pakal's sarcophagus lid famously shows him descending into the underworld tree, a cosmic image of death and renewal, the Red Queen's tomb is visually quieter. Yet its symbolism lies in proximity. If Pakal represented the sun's journey into the underworld to rise again, then the Red Queen may have symbolized the moon, the mysterious feminine force that traverses the night sky. Together they embodied balance, masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, power and ritual. In Maya belief, rulership was not solitary. It was relational. Harmony in the universe required duality. That duality extended into the court. Placing the Red Queen beside Pakal was not just an honour, it was a cosmological necessity. Their closeness in death mirrored their connection in life. She was not behind him. She stood beside him, sharing not only a throne but a destiny. Their tombs speak a sacred dialogue in stone. Two spirits, cloaked in cinnabar, joined beyond time, a testament to cosmic unity, one of history's most profound silences. Though her name has been lost, the Red Queen of Palenque endures, not as a forgotten figure, but as one of the most enigmatic women in ancient history. Her tomb, sealed for over 300 years, now whispers across the centuries. Each artifact, each architectural choice, invites deeper questions. She represents a mystery that refuses to be fully unravelled. Historians may never confirm her exact identity. No glyph records her name. No stela tells her story. Yet the richness of her burial, the jade, the cinnabar, the sacred space, speaks more than words. It reveals that she was revered, powerful and central to the legacy of Palenque. She was not a shadow beside a great king. She was a sovereign force in her own right. In life she likely performed sacred rites, bore royal heirs, and influenced dynastic policy. In death she crossed the threshold into the divine. Through careful ritual, architectural reverence, and cosmological alignment, the Maya ensured she would be remembered. Her tomb was not built for the living to understand. It was crafted for the gods to receive. Yet centuries later, it still speaks to those who listen. The Red Queen remains, not just in stone, but in silence, in scarlet, and in the sacred legacy she left behind. The offerings and the symbolism of her crimson-drenched bones all pointed to a woman of profound importance, not merely as a consort or royal spouse, but as someone who held genuine influence, spiritual authority, and noble blood. The Red Queen compels modern scholars and onlookers alike to re-evaluate assumptions. She stands as a powerful reminder that, in the world of the ancient Maya, women were not silent. They led sacred rituals, governed mighty cities, and shaped the dynastic tides of empires. While kings like Pakal the Great have long occupied the historical spotlight, the Red Queen's re-emergence reminds all that power was not the sole domain of men. It flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Her legacy lies not only in the treasures she was buried with, but also in the ripple she's caused across time, among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every jade bead, every cinnabar-stained bone, every deliberate architectural choice made in Temple 13 speaks clearly. This woman mattered. Perhaps the most extraordinary part of her story isn't what we know, but what we still don't. The Red Queen teaches that history is not simply a list of facts. It is a living puzzle, a shared human yearning to connect with those who came before. Her legacy, therefore, continues to unfold. She lies in red, the colour of sacrifice and rebirth, of blood and transformation. Her face, once hidden behind a mosaic jade mask, now reappears through the lenses of science, art, and wonder. She remains nameless, yet not voiceless, mysterious, but not forgotten. In life, the Red Queen may have ruled a city, but in death she reigns over something greater, our imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone. Her story was written in silence. Yet somehow, across the centuries, she still speaks. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant district of Coyoacán, then a quiet village just outside Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul, the Blue House, was rich with colour, contradiction, and quiet strength. It would later become her sanctuary, her battleground, and ultimately a museum honouring one of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Frida was the third of 4 daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilde Calderón, a devout Catholic with both indigenous and Spanish roots. Her parents were a study in contrast: Guillermo, introspective and intellectual; Matilde, emotionally distant but spiritually devout. Frida inherited her father's artistic eye and introspective nature, as well as her mother's fierce resilience. As a child, Frida was imaginative, outspoken, and daring. She devoured books and asked questions that made many adults uncomfortable. But her early life was marked by suffering. At the age of 6, she contracted polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the other. She wore long skirts to hide it, but never allowed it to limit her spirit. The illness left her bedridden for months, during which she grew close to her father, who encouraged her to stay physically active, ride bicycles, and sharpen her mind. Frida was not interested in becoming a traditional wife or homemaker. She dreamed of becoming a doctor. At 15, she earned admission to the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City, one of the few girls accepted that year. There, she distinguished herself with her sharp intelligence, rebellious wit, and distinct style. She joined a group of intellectuals known as Los Cachuchas, who debated philosophy, literature, and politics. Frida was drawn to revolution and ideas that defied convention. Even before the bus crash that would define her physical life and the fame that would define her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already painting herself into the world, bold, unapologetic, and unwilling to fit anyone else's mold. She wasn't just growing up in Coyoacán, she was preparing to remake herself entirely. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life split in two, the girl she had been and the woman she would be forced to become. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, after school. They were laughing, teasing, and likely arguing. Frida never did anything halfway. But moments later, the bus collided with a streetcar, and in an instant her future unraveled into pain, metal, and silence. The crash was catastrophic. The streetcar crushed the bus against a wall, splintering the wooden frame and hurling passengers through the air. Frida was impaled by an iron handrail. It entered through her left hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places. Her right leg was shattered, her foot dislocated, her collarbone and ribs cracked, her shoulder dislocated, her abdomen pierced. She was just 18 years old. A man draped a coat over her body. Someone noticed that she sparkled, not from blood, but from gold powder she had been carrying, which burst open on impact, covering her in glittering dust. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital and underwent multiple surgeries in the following months. She lay flat on her back, imprisoned in a body cast, writhing with infection and uncertainty. The dream of becoming a doctor faded with each passing day. But in the stillness, something awakened. Her father gave her brushes. Her mother rigged a special easel above her bed. A mirror was placed on the canopy so she could see herself. And there, immobilized by plaster and pain, Frida began to paint. At first it was just to kill time. Then it became an obsession. Her first subjects were her own reflection, because it was all she could see. But it wasn't vanity. It was survival. The crash had shattered her body, but it also opened a door to her soul. A door had opened into Frida Kahlo's own mind, her own body, and eventually into the surreal language of pain and identity that would come to define her art. The girl who once dreamed of healing others now began healing herself, one brushstroke at a time. As Frida lay encased in plaster and steel, her body fighting itself with every breath, she began to paint. What started as therapy quickly became a language. That language was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often hard to look at, which was precisely the point. Frida did not paint pretty flowers or polite landscapes. She painted pain, her pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her first subjects were self-portraits, not out of vanity but necessity. As she famously said, "I paint myself because I'm so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were small, painted on tin or wood panels, inspired by Mexican retablos. Devotional paintings meant to depict stories of suffering and miracles. Frida turned this tradition inward. Her body became the canvas, her emotions the altar. She painted herself split, pierced, and bleeding. In one painting, she is impaled by nails, a modern-day martyr. In another, she floats in a barren landscape tethered to a broken column, a metaphor for her fractured spine. She painted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and exposed. But never passive, always watching. Her pain was not sanitized. She captured the ugliness of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even humor. Each painting was a reclamation of her body, her experience, and her identity as a woman in a world eager to define her. But Frida wasn't just telling her own story. She was inventing a new visual language, one that blended Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and powerful symbolism. Her paintings became dreamlike autopsies of her soul, framed in color, culture, and myth. By the time she recovered enough to walk again, though always with pain, Frida was no longer the aspiring doctor. She had become an artist, and her art was unlike anything anyone had seen. She had taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into the source of her creation. Frida Kahlo didn't merely paint her pain. She made the world look at it. In doing so, she turned suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. In 1928, still recovering, still painting, and just 21 years old, Frida met the man who had become the most profound and turbulent relationship of her life. Diego Rivera. He was more than 20 years her senior and already Mexico's most famous painter. Massive in both stature and presence, Rivera was a titan of Mexican muralism, known for sweeping, politically charged frescoes depicting the people's history. Frida had admired his work. Now she wanted his opinion of hers. She brought her paintings to him at the Ministry of Education, interrupting his scaffolded work to ask bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego studied her pieces and responded, "Yes, and not just out of kindness." He recognized in her something rare, an unfiltered voice, raw and unpretentious, full of rage, irony, pain, and beauty. Their relationship was immediate and consuming. Frida once said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, an odd pairing to outsiders. Diego, famous, politically prominent, and endlessly unfaithful. Frida, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, already walking with a cane. Her parents described the union as a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate but chaotic. Diego supported her artistic growth and encouraged her development. But he also betrayed her, even with her own sister, Christina. Frida, devastated, took lovers of her own, men and women, including rumoured affairs with Leon Trotsky and painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later, under new terms. Frida kept her home, her name, her finances, and her autonomy. Their second marriage was less about conventional romance and more about creative alliance and mutual understanding. Despite heartbreak and infidelity, Diego remained a constant in Frida's life. He challenged her, wounded her, but also believed in her, as an artist, a revolutionary, and a woman destined to redefine the boundaries of art. Together, they were never peaceful, but they were unforgettable. In the 1930s, Frida Kahlo followed Diego Rivera north, to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York, as he completed high-profile mural commissions. These years abroad exposed her to American industrialism, immense wealth, and the jarring contradictions of capitalism. The contrast left her politically disillusioned. Frida was a proud Mexican nationalist, a dedicated communist, and a lover of indigenous traditions. What she witnessed in the United States, especially during the Great Depression, deepened her sense of cultural and political discomfort. In letters home, she mocked American materialism and its obsession with appearances. She longed for Mexico's grit, colour, and contradiction. While Diego painted vast murals on factory walls, Frida painted smaller, quieter revolutions, deeply personal works on tin and canvas. Her artistic style crystallized, sharp, symbolic, and unflinchingly honest, surreal, emotional, and intimate. This was the period during which Frida Kahlo produced some of her most iconic self-portraits. She did not paint herself out of vanity. She painted to survive. Her identity became her landscape. With her body in constant pain from the bus accident, multiple surgeries, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit, she turned inward. Her portraits showed her bleeding, fragmented, exposed, yet her face was always calm, always direct, unapologetic. One of her most powerful works, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her lying on a hospital bed, crying and surrounded by floating symbols of loss, a fetus, a snail, medical equipment, a cracked pelvis. It was raw, graphic, and deeply emotional, a canvas that bled with truth. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego Rivera welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home, while he lived in exile. Frida wore Tijuana dresses, traditional indigenous garments, not just as fashion but as political and cultural statements. Her art was never disconnected from her beliefs. Her identity, her body, and her ideology all intertwined in her work. While Rivera painted murals of revolution, Frida painted its human cost, the body in pieces, the mind on fire, and the self always staring back. In exile and in illness, she became not just a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance. When Frida returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She had become something else entirely. A force, an artist whose work radiated with raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and cultural identity. Back in her homeland, she stepped fully into herself. Her Casa Azul in Coyoacán became a sanctuary of colour and contradiction. Bright cobalt walls, yellow trim, Aztec statues in the garden, monkeys and parrots wandering freely. The house was a living extension of Frida's imagination, a blend of tradition and rebellion, elegance and earth. There she surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, ex-votos, folk art, and revolutionary literature. She wore bold Tijuana dresses, wove flowers into her hair, and painted amid the scent of copal incense and the distant sounds of mariachi music. This period marked an explosion of creativity. Her paintings became more intricate, more symbolic, and more political. Works like The Two Fridas revealed a divided self, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous clothing, strong and composed. It was Frida's visual autobiography, a portrait of love, loss, and heritage. In 1939, she exhibited her work in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised her fiercely original style. But even among the surrealists, Frida stood apart. When André Breton tried to claim her as one of their own, she pushed back. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She painted Mexico, not the romantic postcard version, but the living, breathing country she adored. Her work pulsed with symbolism: skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She honoured the indigenous roots of her homeland while unmasking the violence of its past and present. But even as her artistic voice grew stronger, her health continued to decline. Multiple surgeries, infections, and chronic pain became daily realities. Still, she painted through it all, propped up in bed, torso bound in corsets, fingers clenched around the brush. Frida had returned to Mexico not to rest, but to reclaim her power. Through paint, through politics, and through her fearless embrace of the self. As the 1940s wore on, Frida Kahlo's body continued to betray her. Her spine was deteriorating. Her right leg was constantly infected. She underwent more than 30 surgeries in her lifetime, often in grueling succession. At times she was bedridden for months, encased in body casts, or immobilized by traction devices that stretched her bones apart. Yet still she painted. Each canvas during these years became both a release and an act of resistance. Her works grew darker, more defiant. She painted with clarity sharpened by pain, refusing to hide behind metaphor. In The Broken Column, she presents herself split down the middle, her body pierced with nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her spine. Yet her face is stoic, her gaze unflinching. Pain for Frida was no longer just a subject. It had become her companion, her antagonist, her muse. Her political voice also grew louder. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, wrote fiery letters, and condemned imperialism and injustice. When her health no longer allowed her to walk, she attended protests in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida was given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue celebration of her work. Her health was so fragile that doctors advised her not to attend. But Frida did what only she would do. She arrived by ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, and was placed in the centre of the gallery on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional finery, surrounded by her own paintings, she greeted guests with tequila, laughter, and that fire still burning in her eyes. Her final paintings were both childlike and harrowing. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she portrayed herself wearing a steel corset, cradled by the hands of Marx, casting away symbols of oppression. Her last known work was a still life of sliced watermelons, one piece bearing the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. Even in the face of death, she remained defiant, joyful, and political. Frida Kahlo's final portraits were not merely self-portraits. They were acts of revolution, painted in pain but always signed with life. On July 13th, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo died in the same place she had been born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause of death was listed as a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered of something deeper. She had been ill, yes, but also exhausted. Exhausted by pain, by surgeries, and by the long war with her own body. Just days before her death, she had insisted on attending a political protest against the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala. Weak and confined to a wheelchair, she still raised her clenched fist high in the air. Revolution remained her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was brief, yet piercing. I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. Frida's funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's most prestigious cultural institution. Her body, draped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, was watched over by friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera, the man who had loved her and wounded her in equal measure, was inconsolable. He called her the greatest love of his life, even as his betrayals had nearly broken her. But in the years following her death, something extraordinary happened. Frida Kahlo refused to disappear. At first, her name lingered quietly in art circles. Her work was difficult to categorize. Too political for surrealists, too surreal for traditionalists. Yet slowly, her image, her story, and her defiance began to resonate. Through the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars and activists reclaimed forgotten voices, Frida's became louder. She was no longer simply a painter. She became a symbol of pain transformed into beauty, of feminism born through resistance, of Mexican identity celebrated without apology, of queerness, disability, revolution, and authenticity. Her face, unibrowed, flower-crowned, and unwavering, became iconic. Her home, La Casa Azul, became a museum. Her diary became a sacred text. And her paintings began to hang in the world's most revered museums. Frida Kahlo, who had lived much of her life in Diego Rivera's shadow, stepped forward in death. She didn't merely leave behind art. She left behind a mirror and dared others to look, not with pity, not with fear, but with fire. Today her face is everywhere, printed on t-shirts, painted on murals, turned into dolls, memes, posters, and pop culture icons. But what makes her legacy powerful isn't that people recognize her face. It's that they recognize the truth behind it. Frida never tried to be flawless. She defied every box. She wasn't conventional, and she had no desire to be. In a world that demanded perfection, she gave us realness, raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, and contradictory realness. She celebrated what made her different. Her disability, her queerness, her politics, her culture, and turned all of it into art that transcended borders and time. She became more than an artist. She became a global symbol of defiance, of feminism, of cultural pride, and of creative resistance. For queer communities, she is a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly and unapologetically in a time of suppression. For women, she is proof that power needs no permission. For disabled artists, she is a testament that pain can fuel the brush instead of stopping it. And for Mexico, she is a daughter reclaimed, fierce, folkloric, and forever part of the national soul. Her paintings, once dismissed as too strange or too personal, are now among the most revered in the world. Works like The Two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column are not merely viewed, they are felt. They resonate deeply with anyone who has ever suffered and needed to transform that suffering into something sacred. She lived in the margins and turned them into center stage. She embraced contradiction, a communist who wore gold, a woman betrayed who still believed in love, a body in pieces housing a soul that never broke. And through it all, she painted, not just with colour, but with conviction. Frida Kahlo never asked to become a symbol. She simply told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she told the truth for millions who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. Now, when her face is seen, what's truly being recognised is courage, colour, resistance, and life. Frida Kahlo is not gone. She is immortal.